Welcome to the Voice of San Diego at home. It is Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. That's Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. I'm Scott Lewis, the CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. We're at voiceofsandiego.org. If you want to follow us, we do investigative work, explanatory work on the city of San Diego, the region of the San Diego County, and all the schools and public affairs that go on there. And boy, have there been a lot of bits of news, none bigger for me personally, or for a lot of people, than what happened yesterday. San Diego Unified School District announced its plan, or at least the outline of its plan, to reopen in the fall. We're going to go through that, and we're going to talk about it and try to understand each part of it, including a little bit of a threat or bluff or whatever they put at the end of it about what may keep them from keeping that plan in place. But first, I just wanted to highlight something. If you could check this out, go to our website. Really incredible story just posted now. This is Lisa Halverstadt has done a story about what happens when MTS, the Metropolitan Transit System, gives out tickets for its fare evasions. So $2.50 fare evasion ticket can ruin a person's life over time. She has studied a single week in June 2019 where MTS officers wrote 1,500 fare evasion tickets, and 86% of them remain unpaid, and they become just massive liabilities and credit problems for the people involved. It is an incredible story. Well done by Lisa Halverstadt. Go to voiceofsandiego.org and check it out. That's where we put all of our investigative and explanatory news, including an update about the convention center finances and about how we get power here. This is where you come. If you're new to following local politics, public affairs, come here. We'll get you started. We'll get you going. All right. We are going to talk now with Laura Kohn. Welcome, Laura Kohn. Laura Kohn's my go-to education expert and longtime friend. Hello, Laura.
Hi there.
Laura and I are going to discuss what we heard yesterday from the San Diego Unified School District and what might happen as we go forward. We've been on the edge of our seats trying to figure out how these school districts will or will not open in the fall. It seems like they're all falling down onto this sort of similar path of option one, you can go back to school with some modifications. Options two, you can stay at home with a distance learning program. Let's go through what San Diego Unified came up with. First of all, though, Laura, have you noticed anything in these discussions so far about what's coming out, or just how they're rolling out and making these decisions?
I think the main thing I'm noticing is that the guidance from CDE is pretty general and and not very creative. It's mainly public health driven stuff that we all have been hearing a lot of for a while. And the second thing I'm noticing is that school districts have concluded that they need to offer both online options and some version of in-person options, that they can't just do one or the other. Those are the two things that have really come through for me so far.
Yeah. All right. So let's ground ourselves for a second. San Diego Unified is the largest school district in the city, in the region. It is, there are 42 school districts in San Diego County. 42. I told somebody from Europe the other day that we had 42 school districts in our little region, and he was stunned. He had no idea that that was a thing. They kind of control things a lot more centrally in other countries. 42 different school districts. San Diego Unified is the largest, second largest in the state. We've been on the edge of our seats wondering. They've been making a lot of threats. First, they made a threat a couple months ago to the lawmakers in Sacramento, saying, if you do not give us more money, we will not be able to open in good conscience. We talked about that a lot in this forum about what that meant and what that threat meant. Legislature came back the day before yesterday and said, okay, we're going to keep you at about your same level. Now, that budget has not been approved by the governor. The governor still, I think, tentatively remains opposed to it. But the budget did go forward from the lawmakers themselves, sort of protecting basic level of funding they had last year with a little bump, actually. And so they got that. They came back yesterday. San Diego Unified wanted to plan for the day after that to reveal its plan. Let's start with the actual plan. Basically, it's two parts. One part says You can go to school 5 days a week. We're going to talk about some of the modifications that you have to deal with. The second part was online. Let's listen to them talk about their online learning program. This is San Diego Unified.
Online learning option will include new tools and strategies for student collaboration and peer connection, more engaging curricular options, the use of active learning strategies such as discussions and hands-on activities and projects, better ways of providing feedback to students, and increased opportunities for enrichment. In this option, learning takes place primarily in the home. Students receive 4 days of synchronous and asynchronous instruction and have 1 day a week to solidify their learning and catch up on any unfinished assignments. Much like distance learning, in online learning, families play a central role in organizing the learning at home.
Okay, there was a few words in there. Let's define them. What is synchronous versus asynchronous?
Yeah, I flagged that also. So this is distance learning jargon.
Okay.
And so asynchronous learning is when the student is doing work at their own time, at their own pace.
Okay.
And synchronous learning is when there's a scheduled appointment that they have to participate in with their teacher or with their teacher and other students as well. So that's the scheduled part. And it also tends to refer to students learning at the same pace, the same material at the same pace, versus asynchronous, you can move through at your own pace. So not sure which part of that they were emphasizing or if they meant at the same time.
Yeah, there was another part in that slide, and they talked about this a bit, that they were going to really, both for the in-class and for the distance learning, try to provide customized learning. That's another buzzword we've heard a lot over the years, mostly in reference to charter schools and some experimental programs and such. The idea that every child learns at his own pace, his or her own pace, and thus you should treat them, based on where they're at.
Yep. Yeah, another buzzword term that's related to that is competency-based learning. And it's the concept that kids get to move at their own pace. And so if they're ready to zoom ahead, they zoom ahead. And embedded in that concept, and again, there's like the conceptual version and what it looks like in practice, is that kids are what we say jagged. I was really good at math when I was in school, but I was just right with the pack in science. And so in math, my teachers would let me go ahead and do grade level work that was above whatever grade level I was in, but I was synchronous with my peers in other subjects where I wasn't. And that's conceptually, I really love that, as long as there's sufficient support for the kids who are behind so that they are asynchronously moving quickly to catch up. That's really the key, because if you aren't attentive to that, then you can be exacerbating inequalities.
Got it. All right, let's continue on. So I want to hear from you all, teachers, parents, educators of any kind, grandparents. What do you think? They've given you two options: go back 5 days a week. We're going to talk about some of the modifications, or do this distance learning online if you're at San Diego Unified. Or, this seems to be the plan. Poway is going to probably do something similar. A bunch of other school districts seem like they're probably going to go with some version of, you can come back to school if you want. If you do not want to, we're going to try to put our best foot forward with this distance learning program. All right, let's move on to that sort of second point. Now, if you go back to school, here is one of the things that you'll see at the school district, at the school site. And they talked about that they are going to be screening for people who might be sick.
Currently, temperature checks and daily screenings are required in accordance with county and state guidelines. We anticipate daily screenings will be required for staff and students when we return to schools.
So temperature checks, I had a guy at the County Office of Education say this could be a wildly difficult project for a school to bring in 600-700 kids into the school with checking their temperature every day. What do you think about that? Do you think that's going to be much of an issue, or just part of daily life now?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. One is I've been talking to a UCSD epidemiologist, Rebecca Fielding Miller. She's my go-to expert on everything COVID related. And she concurs with what seems to be the scientific consensus that temperature checks are pretty lousy predictors of whether somebody is infectious and infected. Only about 30% of cases coming into the hospital with high levels of illness with COVID came in with a really elevated temperature. It just doesn't, it's not really that great of a screener is the bottom line.
Now, on the
And
other
so
hand,
considering all the hassle that schools are going to have to go through to get to purchase the infrared temperature checkers and then get everybody screened on the way in, comparing that against how valid it is as a predictor of whether someone's unwell, I'm not sure it really balances out very well, but it makes people feel better.
yeah, I think that maybe the better interpretation of it is some version of like, look, we're going to do a lot of little things that may have a lot of little impacts on the spread of the virus, and added together, it's a significant impact on the spread of the virus, right? Like if you catch somebody who has a temperature, one thing they did talk about yesterday was they would have to create an isolated area, not just the nurse's office as it exists in many schools, but another isolated area on every campus so that they could keep kids separate if they do find that they have a temperature or COVID-like symptoms. Kind of a fascinating moment. Yes, we want to hear from you. What do you think about going to school this way, modified or online? Which do you think you will choose? I look forward to hearing what you say. We've got one comment here. Jessica Hughes says, "I love the plan. My son is going back." I think a lot of us are ready to get the kids out. Go to school. Just go to school, please.
Yeah.
Here's another one. Working at a high school, daily screening. So you have a line of 1,000 people to get checked.
Right.
I imagine they'd have to stagger it, maybe get 20 different stations each classroom. For some version of that, have no idea. Again, this was the outline. I can't imagine how they're actually going to specifically pull that out.
Yeah. By the way, the temperature checker that's not such a great job because if you're the person screening 250 people coming in close enough contact with you to check their temperature, that's putting you, the screener, at an elevated risk. By the way, I appreciate Heidi's other comment that some schools don't even have a full-time nurse, and that is absolutely the case. All around San Diego County, we have office assistants providing the nursing, what is effectively the nursing services. So it's not like we have medical expertise on most. I'm sure, I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm confident that it's the vast majority of campuses in San Diego don't have anything like a full-time nurse.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the other bit. Obviously, a lot of people have been focusing on masks. Masks are a big part of our cultural debate these days. In my opinion, I'm just going to put my own bias out there. Masks are a way of telling the rest of the world that you're doing everything you can. You want to get out in the community. It's not a sign of fear to me. A sign of a mask is somebody who wants to go out in the community, wants to interact. Just like a football player wears a mask because they want to go butt heads. Like in a similar way, we want to go out. We want to butt heads with the world and deal with the consequences. And the mask is a way of telling everybody we're following everything we can to try to contain this thing. It keeps you from touching your face, keeps you from blowing droplets out, which is a fancy way, I guess, of saying little pieces of snot. You don't want those out there in the world, and so it keeps them there. And so other places seem to be handling it all right. We seem to have a lot of trouble with it. But here was the decision on masks. We were all paying attention. Would they say they were going to make people wear masks? The state, one of the few very stringent points that the state made, you made the point that it was very vague. They made the point at the state that educators should wear masks, that it was one of the very more clear things they put out. And so there was a follow-up to that where they said not only should they wear the masks, but if they need to be seen because part of their job is actually enunciating or something for kids to see, then they should wear a face shield. And so then the question comes up, who's going to buy the face shield? Who's going to clean it? All that stuff. Here was San Diego Unified's decision on face coverings. We had to watch it a couple times because it went so fast. They didn't dwell on it at all. Nobody really debated it or discussed it. Here is what they said.
The use of face coverings is another guideline we need to follow, as currently outlined with both state and county guidelines for schools. To implement a plan for face coverings at school, we know we will need proper training on use and removal, reasonable accommodations for students who are not able to wear a face covering, and alternate protections as needed, as in the case of medical reasons. And the use of face shields could help replace or augment face coverings. This will need to be decided on a case-by-case basis.
What do you think? I'm one of the big questions that came up for me is what happens if a kid doesn't wear a mask? Are we going to start to create a discipline problem? You know, where the last thing this school district or any school districts really need is more rules to enforce, more suspensions to give out, those sorts of things. I had somebody else just say, look, they're going to require them, but then they're going to look the other way when it doesn't, when there isn't compliance. What do you think about the mask determination?
On the one hand, I agree with the guideline. I am a believer in masks. Dr. Fielding Miller believes that they're effective both for reducing transmission from you out to the community, but also her read of the evidence is that it helps keep you from contracting the virus as well. At a lower level, but if you're reducing your risk by 10%, that can be really meaningful. So I'm pro mask, and I totally recognize that compliance is going to be an issue at particular grade levels. Hardest, the younger kids are going to be snapping each other's masks and having difficulties with it that way. Kids who are sensitive, have sensory issues, are going to really struggle with it, and then high schoolers just like to break rules. So yeah, I tend to agree that it shouldn't be. I think enforcing it shouldn't create more divisions and inequalities, but it's worth trying.
I think the mask issue in high school will be fascinating to watch or in middle schools too, maybe even elementaries. But this idea of it seems like, what will the body public of the traditional public high school decide? Will it become the peer pressure to wear one, or will there be a peer pressure to not wear one? I feel like the obvious one is that the peer pressure will be to not wear one, but you can also see it perhaps in some places flipping the other way. It would be fascinating to watch. Let's check in with some of our comments. This is the obvious question. I wish I had a good answer. Who's going to be in charge of all this?
Right.
Temperature checking, cleaning. Are teachers being held responsible for learning models? More teachers be hired? There's so many issues to solve. No question. We're going to get into that in a second. About what their response is. That I want to hear from you all. Are you going to be comfortable sending your kids back to school or using the distance learning? Or if you just choose distance learning, will you try some other homeschool platforms that might be more evolved or whatever? Let's go on to the next point. About this one really interested me. And I think it was, again, another subtle point that I don't know how it looks on actual campuses. Going to be fascinating to watch.
Current guidelines are that you should maintain 6 feet of physical distance whenever possible. As we consider physical distancing at school, we look on campus, arrival and departure, lunch, breaks, recess. We're looking at staggering lunch times, arrival times, which would then affect dismissal times. And we see the need for markings, both indoor and outdoor. In class, we are considering the use of physical barriers because barriers may help more students get into each classroom.
That was the point that stuck out to me. They're worried about classrooms not being able to distance people. And so they're saying, well, maybe we don't have to distance as much if we put partitions, I think, between people or between people and students and their teacher or both. Wow. Obviously not for an element. I can't picture a second or a first grade class, the kids sitting in these little silos or cubicles or something, but maybe in a bigger high school class or something. I don't know. How does that
I guess. First of all, I just keep thinking about the plexiglass industry and how happy they are these days. I've seen the pictures from international schools about how where they've put up plexiglass barriers between students. So that's what I envision also. One of the ironies, the education field's done a lot of work over the last decade to break down the rigid rows of desks model and have flexible seating and having kids group and regroup and work together and get to move around so that they're not required to sit in one place for 6 hours a day. And this idea of putting each kid in their own plexiglass cubicle really just kills a lot of that, sets us back. Now, it's a temporary setback, to be sure, and it's and so maybe that's the way to think about it. I'm sure it is the way to think about it, but yeah, lots of plexiglass to help, because California overcrowds its classrooms. Our teacher to student ratio in high schools is north of 30 a lot of times, and in middle schools it's close to that. Elementary schools it's really high. So the fact that we are accustomed to underfunding our education system for the past, since Prop 13 passed, is what makes this harder to deal with, because we've got a lot of kids jammed into each.
Yeah. Let's take a couple of questions really quickly. So there was this question came in: if a staff or student gets COVID, does the whole school go back online for 14 days? They did not mention this. However, what they discussed was that they really want to try to keep kids together in cohorts. And the point of those cohorts is that you can shut down that cohort for a while, as opposed to having to shut down the full school. But I think that's a giant variable that we're all going to have to deal with. There will be kids who get COVID. There will be educators who get it. What are we going to do? Are we going to shut the whole thing down at that point? Or are we going to handle it some way, with more tolerance for the risk somehow, and that's what they're talking about. One thing that was extremely disappointing to me is that they didn't discuss or incorporate or get any help from the county about testing, tracing, and isolation. There's no plan like there are in Korea and other places to do really intense testing of students and educators on a regular basis, and then make sure that they isolate the cases and can kind of shut down where their problem areas. I mean, if you want to have confidence in going back to school, that to me is like the first step, and the county has shown zero interest in being a partner in that, and it's very disappointing to me. So yeah, I don't know how those partitions are going to work within a class. Again, the state punted to the county punted to these districts, and I think these districts are just going to do the best, as San Dieguito said, practical. The best is practical. Right. And I bet you that practical starts to get, definition starts to get pretty muddy over time. Let's turn to this next big point San Diego Unified made. This was extraordinary. So it turns to San Diego Unified Superintendent Cindy Martin, who says, this is the plan. However, this.
The bottom line is this. The COVID emergency costs are only partially funded through the legislature's budget. We believe the current funding approved by the state legislature only takes us through half the year. Funding for the full year will depend on the passage of the HEROES Act and more federal relief.
I mean, what she's saying there is that if the U.S. Senate doesn't approve the House of Representatives, the U.S. House of Representatives, whatever issue of bailout this one is, if they don't approve that bailout, then they're going to shut it down midway. It's extraordinary.
And revert to 100% online.
Yeah.
Midway. So even if COVID is less prominent at mid-year, I suppose, we haven't scenarioed that out because who can, but suppose COVID is settled down by mid-year, then would they be able to stay open if they're able to maybe loosen some of the health restrictions? Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah. This is a giant game of brinkmanship with they're basically holding all of our futures up and saying these are all going to get messed up unless the U.S. Senate, led by Mitch McConnell, from Kentucky helps give a lot of money to us. Now, their argument, and Richard Barrera from the school board brought this up, is that they can and are putting pressure on school districts in these swing states that senators are facing tough races in to get them to push the senators to try to approve this plan. Quite a moment of brinksmanship and balance, though. And it kind of made this guy, Zachary Patterson, member of the school board. He's the student representative on the school board, shining star out of the event. Loved
So
watching
amazing.
him. Loved
too.
watching him. He's like, hey, I got something to say. Got something to say. And he says,
yeah. So I won't lie, I still do have some grave concerns that I fear about moving forward in this capacity due to the funding that we're facing, and I am very fearful about that. And what I think I need to feel a little bit more stable about this is, I would appreciate it, Trustee Barrera, if you could talk a little bit more about where we are currently in that fight for federal funding. I mean, obviously, I know I'm participating on one end as a student, but I want to know for sure that we are almost positive that something will come forth. My other thing would be, how much can we afford to lose in the current HEROES Act in order to continue operating for the rest of the school year? And the final thing would be, is half of the year considered January 28th, let's say the end of semester 1? Because if so, then you might have a new Congress coming in and being able to legislate at that point in time. But just evaluating all possible angles, and I think I need that in order to ensure that I'm doing the best job at providing opportunities for students to stay in school for the entire year, since that's an eminent priority for me.
this is right, Zachary. What a guy.
Yes,
Love
use
that
power.
kid. I just love that kid. What are you doing, Zachary? You want a job journalism? Come on board. Like, what a great guy. I just loved hearing him. He chimed in later about students getting direct communication using their own emails, and they're like, yeah, we'll take some action on that. Great job, Zachary, representing schools and students. But I'm sorry, the answer to your question is there is no certainty on this. Yeah. There's no way we can know for sure that the U.S. Senate's going to fund this, and they don't know what date they're talking about. So Zachary, I guess, has been involved himself in lobbying some of these other states to get on board with pushing their senators to approve that. Just an incredible moment in education. I think in the basic future of public education. Would you say?
Oh, absolutely. By the way, I see double brinksmanship, because there's the state is the legislature's passed budget is very different than the governor's, and so they've sort of finessed over. They're just assuming the governor is going to approve the K-12 budget at the higher level that the legislature passed. I hope that's the right assumption, but and then to just count on the federal government to come through. Whew.
Yeah, they're saying they need an additional 20 or 30% funding to stay open the entire year. And that is even though, they're all projecting their enrollment's going to go down. There's going to be kids that don't go at all, that switch to charters or whatever. So really an incredible moment. Now, one thing, there was a teacher here that said, I have no choice. I have to go back. I do believe, let's see if I can find that. I do believe what they've said in there is that teachers who do not want to go back can stay at home and can operate some of the distance learning programs. We do not, these are giant questions, do not know how that's going to work out at all. I need to wrap this up. Laura, any last thoughts on where we're headed?
No, nothing for now. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Put in more comments if you'd like. We'll follow those up. We can follow your questions up with some of our reporters. I want to know what you think. What do you feel about the plan? What are you going to do with your children? Or if you're an educator, how are you going to handle it? Thanks all for joining. Laura, thank you for joining. Always a pleasure.
Do it.
All right, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks all, and stay tuned for Voice of San Diego at Home again on Friday, right here at 1:30 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks.